Story 1: The Spoon and the Sweet Tooth, the Great Chocolate Heist. It started with something so simple, a missing spoon. Not the kind of spoon you'd expect to spark a federal investigation, let alone unravel a high-stakes heist in a sleepy Midwestern town. But this wasn't any spoon. It was a specialized stainless steel measuring spoon used in the production of a boutique chocolate company nestled in the heart of Moline, Illinois. And when it went missing, so did over $600,000 worth of artisan chocolate. You probably haven't heard of Velvet Bean chocolate. Most people haven't. It's a locally adored but relatively unknown premium chocolate producer that distributes high-end bars to luxury retailers across the Midwest and Pacific Northwest. Run by a soft-spoken chocolatier named Harold Burke, the company had built its brand on sustainability, traceable cocoa sources, and handcrafted techniques right down to the polished brass molds imported from France. So when the numbers didn't add up on a quarterly inventory check in February 2017, Harold assumed it was a clerical mistake. Then he assumed it was a glitch in the new ERP software they had installed. Then, finally, when the reports were triple-checked and audited, he came to a more sobering realization. Someone had been stealing his chocolate. But not just stealing it, replacing it. The thief wasn't just making product vanish, they were tampering with it. Spoiled batches were being mixed into good ones. Boxes labeled as single-origin Ecuadorian actually contained inferior blends. One retailer even found that a pallet marked for distribution to a Chicago boutique contained nothing but broken bars wrapped in mismatched labels. The brand's reputation was starting to fray at the edges. The missing spoon came into the picture by accident. During a casual floor walk, Harold noticed that a specific stainless steel measuring spoon used to portion a rare Tahitian vanilla powder into the high-end truffle mixture wasn't in its slot. It hadn't been signed out. No one claimed to have used it. It was simply gone. It was a minor thing. But that spoon, unlike the standard factory tools, had a unique identifier etched onto its handle. S74B. Harold remembered it because it was a replacement spoon ordered after a worker accidentally dropped the original down a floor drain 2 years prior. He'd had to special order it due to the rare dimensions and had personally signed off on the delivery. So when the spoon showed up 3 weeks later, found tucked beneath a production shelf during a cleanup, it raised immediate questions. It was covered in fine chocolate dust. Traces of Tahitian vanilla were found along its edge, but no one had reported using it. Harold brought this up to the shift supervisor, Monica Estrada, a woman known for her fastidious record-keeping and short tolerance for nonsense. Her records showed that none of the vanilla truffle production had been scheduled in the past month. The spoon shouldn't have been used at all. That's when Monica quietly initiated her own investigation off the clock. Using her phone, she began documenting the inconsistencies she noticed. Unlabeled shipping crates that showed up after hours, batch numbers that didn't correspond with production schedules, delivery vans departing at strange hours with no logbooks to account for them. Meanwhile, Harold hired an independent auditor, Sarah Kincaid, a former forensic accountant turned consultant specializing in supply chain anomalies. She combed through the records with a scalpel's precision. It took her just 4 days to determine that nearly 3% of all chocolate inventory had gone missing over the course of 9 months. But even stranger, several deliveries had been recorded on routes the company didn't even serve. The heist, it seemed, wasn't a single event but a slow siphoning. And it had been happening right under everyone's noses. Unlikely clues began to surface. Sarah noticed that the loss rate was always highest on the third Tuesday of each month. It was an odd pattern, one that didn't correspond with holiday production, supplier schedules, or payroll cycles. She checked vehicle logs, driver logs, even HVAC system usage. Nothing stood out. Until she stumbled on a tiny line item buried in an invoice ledger. Packaging inserts, artisan wraps, vendor, Choco Shell Solutions. Choco Shell Solutions didn't exist. There was no record of this vendor on any supplier lists. The address listed led to a UPS drop box in Kansas City. Payment had been routed to a bank in Grand Cayman. Sarah flagged it and brought it to Harold, who had never approved any such vendor. They contacted their bank and discovered that the account used to pay Choco Shell had been created using company funds, but by someone with internal clearance. At this point, Monica stepped forward with something peculiar, a blurred photo she had taken from the mezzanine level one evening. It showed one of the newer employees wheeling a cart toward Dock 3, an exit typically reserved for waste disposal, not shipments. The employee's name was Evan Greaves. He had been hired 7 months prior as a night shift assistant technician. Quiet, polite, and never late, Evan had no disciplinary record, no odd behavior, and was considered harmless by most staff. But when Harold and Sarah looked deeper into Evan's background, cracks appeared. Evan had previously worked at 2 other food production facilities, both of which had reported minor inventory losses during his tenure. Both businesses were now defunct. Then came the kicker. Evan's LinkedIn profile listed him as a logistics consultant for a small distribution company in Indiana. That company's website was a one-page placeholder, hosted through a cheap registrar with no contact number. A pattern of shadows. A pattern began to emerge: chocolate, always chocolate. Boutique firms, limited production runs, and losses small enough to fly under the radar. Evan, it appeared, was orchestrating low-volume, high-value thefts from inside the belly of small operations. But he wasn't doing it alone. That became apparent when a shipment manifest was recovered from the garbage chute, half-burned, but still legible. It included destinations that didn't exist on company maps and driver initials that didn't belong to any known employees. There was a ring. And Velvet Bean chocolate, with its focus on high-end ingredients and traceable sourcing, had been targeted not just for its goods but for its reputation. If enough bad products circulated under its name, it could tank contracts, shutter deals, and force the company into bankruptcy, allowing someone to swoop in and buy it cheap. But why would anyone go to that extent? And who would want to destroy a niche chocolate brand in the middle of the American Midwest? Sarah had a theory, but it was incomplete. She needed more data. So she reached out to a contact at the FDA who had recently flagged counterfeit food items entering the U.S. from overseas, some of which mimicked high-end chocolate wrappers. Could it be that the missing chocolate wasn't just being stolen, but being replicated? Or worse, used to front an international counterfeit ring? The scent of betrayal often hides behind the fragrance of trust. For months, someone had quietly turned a beloved chocolate company into a front for something more sinister, perhaps even global. Sarah Kincaid's call to her contact at the Food and Drug Administration, an agent named Leonard Costa, opened the story wider than she ever imagined. Leonard, a seasoned field investigator, had recently compiled a list of flagged chocolate shipments entering U.S. ports, including several counterfeit bars modeled after artisanal brands. One name stood out: Velvet Bean. Same font, same textured wrapping, same rare ingredients listed, including the Tahitian vanilla and single-origin Ecuadorian cacao that Velvet Bean prided itself on sourcing ethically. But the bars weren't real. Laboratory analysis had shown them to be a mishmash of low-quality fillers, palm oil substitutes, and synthetic vanillin. They weren't just fakes, they were potentially dangerous. But how had someone duplicated the wrapping, the texture, and even the detailed origin stories printed on the inside of each wrapper? Leonard offered a sobering explanation. Someone on the inside is feeding them everything they need down to the production templates. Following the flow of chocolate, Harold, devastated by the possibility, gave Sarah access to all the company's digital infrastructure. Within hours, she uncovered something quietly damning. Design files for all the company's labels and packaging had been accessed through a remote VPN at odd hours. The login credentials belonged to someone she hadn't expected, the head of design, Natalie Reeve. Natalie had been with the company since its founding and was known for being intensely private. She worked remotely from Portland, Oregon, and rarely visited headquarters. Sarah hesitated. It seemed unlikely that Natalie, who had created the entire visual brand of Velvet Bean, would risk everything for money. But the evidence was clear. Her credentials had been used to access not just the design files, but detailed shipment logs and ingredient sourcing maps. When confronted, Natalie was stunned. Her voice trembled during the video call. "I haven't logged into the network in weeks," she said. "My system was hacked last fall. I thought it was phishing, so I changed my passwords. Are you telling me someone used my account to steal our brand?" Sarah confirmed it. Natalie's home office system had been compromised, but the timing of the breach coincided with the hearing of Evan Greaves. Was it possible that he or someone he worked with had engineered the hack? Meanwhile, Leonard Costa expanded his inquiry. Cross-referencing customs records and shipping manifests, he identified 3 different docks, 2 in Los Angeles, 1 in Charleston, where counterfeit chocolate had entered the country under various shell company names. The importer addresses often traced back to PO boxes or fake warehouse fronts. The shipments shared one unusual detail. Each was marked as Boutique Cocoa, 81.4% blend, fragile cargo. That exact phrasing, 81.4% blend, was exclusive to Velvet Bean's signature bar. It wasn't a generic percentage. It was a branded line. Someone had weaponized the brand's precision. A warehouse raid. By early May, the investigation had quietly grown into a task force. Leonard pulled in contacts from the FDA's Office of Criminal Investigations and coordinated with Homeland Security. The break came through an unexpected source, a truck driver named Miles DeVero. Miles had been contracted through a third-party logistics company to transport what he was told were fragile baked goods from a Chicago warehouse to a private distribution center near Cincinnati. But he had grown suspicious when the baked goods were boxed in vacuum-sealed bags marked for display use only. The packages bore a striking resemblance to Velvet Bean chocolate bars, but the logos were slightly off, like they'd been stretched in printing. The finish on the wrap was matte, not gloss. When Miles tried to eat one, it tasted like wax. He filed an anonymous report to the FDA. 2 weeks later, Leonard and a team raided the Chicago warehouse. Inside were more than 45,000 imitation bars. Most had been stacked in crates labeled garden tools or interior wall panels. Hidden among them were machines used for foil wrapping, digital printers loaded with Velvet Bean artwork, and bags of synthetic chocolate powder. One computer found in the back office contained hundreds of email exchanges and invoices, some rooted to foreign addresses, others using burner accounts. But buried deep in one folder was something different. A scanned employee badge from Velvet Bean. The photo, Evan Greaves. The double life of Evan Greaves. When law enforcement visited the last known address Evan had listed with Velvet Bean, they found an empty apartment and a forwarded mail slip to an Airbnb in Kalamazoo, Michigan. He was gone. But his trail wasn't cold. Surveillance footage at the Kalamazoo property showed Evan leaving 2 nights prior, carrying 3 duffel bags and a laptop. He boarded a late-night bus to Toronto. Interpol was notified. Sarah, frustrated but not surprised, realized that Evan was more than just an opportunist. He was part of an organized operation, one that targeted boutique brands with weak security protocols. Velvet Bean, for all its artistry, had never imagined needing a cybersecurity plan. Back at the company's headquarters, Harold began doing damage control. He issued press releases, initiated a full recall of suspect batches, and reached out personally to clients and retailers. The financial damage was already deep, contracts suspended, reviews tanking, trust eroding. But a curious anomaly surfaced. Even though the counterfeit product had been found in multiple states, several batches confirmed fake had passed through legitimate warehouses. How had they infiltrated the supply chain? The answer came from a shipping clerk named Dana Vargas. Dana remembered seeing a second set of labels being applied to certain crates late at night, different from the usual ones. The man applying them wasn't a factory worker, but someone who wore a reflective vest and carried a clipboard. "Just auditing inventory," he had said. She hadn't questioned it at the time. Leonard had the security footage pulled. The man was not a known employee. He wore a fake badge and had never signed in through the front desk. A wider web. Interpol's cybercrime division identified the alias Evan Greaves had used to cross the Canadian border, Michael R. Flynn. The photo ID had Evan's face, but the name was false. The passport had been flagged in Estonia months earlier, used in a separate counterfeit luxury watch ring. Velvet Bean's heist was no longer a simple internal theft. It had become a slice of a multinational operation, targeting high-value, low-security goods that could be counterfeited for profit. Sarah proposed a theory. Evan's role wasn't to steal product. It was to replicate it, then poison the supply chain just enough to cause confusion so the fake bars could be sold as discount overstock. The real stuff disappears. The fake stuff floods the gray market, and your brand gets blamed. It was elegant in its own twisted way. Meanwhile, Monica, the shift supervisor, who first noticed the missing spoon, quietly provided Sarah with an overlooked set of handwritten logs. They showed that someone had been accessing the vanilla truffle production line during night shifts marked as cleaning time. The access card number used belonged to a technician named Jace Hollander. Jace had worked at Velvet Bean for 4 years. Friendly, quiet, never missed a shift. He had vouched for Evan when he was hired. When interviewed, Jace denied everything until investigators searched his locker and found an external hard drive with digital molds, production specs, and ingredient orders. He had been the local contact. His price, $18,000 in Bitcoin. But still, the spoon. With Jace arrested and Evan on the run, the case was nearing closure. But one detail continued to haunt Sarah. The spoon. Why take it? Why use a unique, traceable spoon when any standard tool would do? She went back to the employee logs and noticed something peculiar. The spoon had been signed out on a day when Jace was off-site. Only one person had clocked in unusually early that day, Harold Burke. Her brow furrowed. A deeper dig revealed a confidential bank loan tied to Harold's name, one that he had defaulted on 2 years prior. The amount? Just under $700,000, the same value as the estimated chocolate loss. Had he staged the entire theft? Or was he forced into silence after being approached by the counterfeiters? Could it be that the spoon wasn't the clue that solved the crime, but the symbol of something Harold wanted to disappear? There's a moment in every investigation when the story seems to settle. Arrests are made, reports are filed, names are printed in ink. But sometimes, when you peer just beyond the headlines, the questions still ripple beneath the surface, unanswered, unacknowledged, and unsettling. That's exactly where this story was headed. The confession that changed everything. Jace Hollander's arrest was, at first, the breakthrough the task force needed. He confessed quickly and in detail, almost too easily. According to his statement, Evan had approached him casually in the break room one evening, asking about batch access codes and production hacks to make work easier. It started with small favors: printing duplicate batch labels, creating temporary override keys for cleaning shifts. Jace claimed he didn't know about the counterfeit scheme until months later, and by then, the operation was already in motion. "I just wanted to help a friend out," Jace wrote in his signed statement. "And when I realized what was really happening, it was too late to back out." He described anonymous Bitcoin payments, untraceable burner phones, and midnight instructions left in his glove compartment. But his most compelling revelation was this: he wasn't the only one inside Velvet Bean who knew what was happening. That caught Sarah Kincaid's attention immediately. Jace hesitated to say more at first, but when presented with the prospect of a federal conspiracy charge, he broke. "There was someone feeding the timeline from the top. I never met them. I just called them Chef. They'd approve the windows for fake shipments to slide in, told Evan when QA would be distracted, sometimes even gave me the keys." Sarah reviewed the logs again. Only one person consistently had access to all zones of the facility, including the secure truffle chamber, where the stolen spoon had first gone missing. Harold Burke, the founder in the crosshairs. Sarah wasn't ready to accuse him. Not yet. She respected Harold. He had cooperated fully, opened his books, and invited her to find the truth wherever it led. But the data didn't lie. Harold's access card was used at odd hours, particularly on nights when no production was scheduled. Internal VPN traffic often originated from his IP address during international counterfeit shipment windows. And then there was the loan, the massive $700,000 liability he had kept off Velvet Bean's books. Digging deeper, Sarah discovered that the loan had been extended by a shadowy lender tied to an offshore investment group. The same group had recently invested in a small company in the Dominican Republic, one now producing boutique chocolate under a name suspiciously similar to Velvet Bean, Velvabon. It was Harold's handwriting on the early designs of the logo, buried in an old cloud folder. Was this all a setup? A soft sabotage of his own company to offload it, shift operations overseas, and cash in while Velvet Bean collapsed? Leonard Costa from the FDA grew cautious. "This kind of case where the victim might also be the architect gets messy fast," he warned. "We need something solid, no assumptions." The surveillance play. So they watched him. For 2 weeks, Harold was placed under covert surveillance. Nothing out of the ordinary occurred until the evening of June 12th. At 10:03 p.m., Harold drove to the Velvet Bean factory, unlocked the truffle chamber, and entered carrying a small lockbox. He stayed inside for 22 minutes. When he left, the box was empty. Agents entered within the hour. Hidden beneath the floor grating near the same shelf where the spoon had been rediscovered months earlier, they found what the lockbox had held: a stack of documents, shipment logs, burner phone transcripts, printed Bitcoin wallet keys, and a USB drive. On the USB, voice memos, dozens of them. One in particular, labeled Insurance, MP3, began with Harold's voice. "If you're hearing this, it means I've either vanished or been forced to explain. Hear what I know." What followed was a 23-minute recording detailing the scheme. Harold's story. In the recording, Harold admitted he had been approached coerced, in fact by a man claiming to represent ethical offshore manufacturing investors. At first, it sounded like an opportunity. Expand his operations, outsource some packaging, reduce costs. But as Harold soon learned, the man wasn't interested in helping Velvet Bean. He wanted to hollow it out. Their plan, Harold said in the memo, was to slowly erode the brand's trust, sneak faulty product into the market, create doubt among retailers, then offer a rescue acquisition for pennies on the dollar. When Harold hesitated, the threats began. They knew about his loan default. They referenced private emails between him and Natalie, hinting at a possible romantic affair, which Harold denied. They said they would destroy him personally and professionally if he didn't play along. So he gave them access. Not to the chocolate itself, but to the schedule, to the QA patterns. He allowed the operation to unfold while pretending to remain oblivious. "The spoon," he said near the end, "was my signal to start unraveling it. I planted it. I wanted someone to notice, and Monica did. That gave me hope. If she followed the spoon, the truth would find a way." Charges, trials, and a vanishing act. Armed with the confession, investigators confronted Harold. He didn't deny the contents of the recording, but he also refused to implicate anyone beyond Evan and the foreign agent, whose real name he claimed not to know. In a surprise move, Harold agreed to plead guilty to obstruction and corporate negligence in exchange for leniency. Jace, meanwhile, accepted a deal for cooperation. Natalie was cleared of wrongdoing. Her credentials had genuinely been compromised. But Evan, he was never found. Interpol traced him as far as Lisbon. Then the trail went cold. Velvet Bean survived, barely. After the scandal broke, several investors withdrew, but local media coverage painted Harold as a tragic figure, manipulated, ashamed, but ultimately trying to do the right thing. Monica was promoted to director of operations. Sarah returned to Chicago and quietly turned down 5 new cases. She needed a break. As for the chocolate, Velvet Bean rebranded. They changed suppliers, overhauled their security infrastructure, and began including micro QR tags on every wrapper, each leading to a blockchain ledger verifying authenticity. Sales eventually rebounded. But not everyone forgave. Some retailers never returned. Some customers swore off the brand entirely. For every person who saw Harold as a victim, another called him a fraud. And the counterfeit bars, they're still circulating. Every few months, customs agents in various ports intercept another shipment, slightly different branding, new names, same formula. The shadow network remains. Final notes. In an industry not often associated with high-stakes fraud, the Velvet Bean case served as a stark warning. Even something as innocent as a chocolate bar can become the battleground for global crime. It's a reminder that theft doesn't always arrive with broken glass and crowbars. Sometimes it comes wearing a chef's coat, holding a spoon. What would have happened if Monica hadn't noticed the missing spoon? How many other small businesses are being quietly devoured by shadows we don't see? Story 2. The Librarian's Ledger. Embezzlement in a quiet town. At first, it just looked like a clerical error. A misplaced decimal, a bounced invoice, maybe even a billing system hiccup. After all, how could anyone suspect a local librarian, a quiet, cardigan-wearing woman known for her punctuality and community bake sales, of embezzling nearly $400,000 from a public library? But the money was gone, and it had vanished over the course of 9 years. This is the story of how a sleepy-town librarian with a near-perfect attendance record, a calming voice, and a secret online life pulled off one of the most undetectable financial crimes in her state's history, hidden among overdue fines, book donations, and spreadsheets no one else bothered to read. The heart of the town, Elmstead, Ohio, isn't the kind of place where major crime happens. A former railroad town turned commuter suburb, its population hovers around 9,000. The town square is made up of a diner, a florist, a pharmacy, and a municipal library that looks like it was lifted from a storybook. The Elmstead Public Library was more than just a place for books. It was the town's meeting place. Story time for kids every Wednesday, free knitting circles on Fridays, a modest but well-loved collection of rare books kept in a locked glass case. No alarms, no cameras. At the center of it all was Carolyn Meeks, the library's director. Carolyn had worked at the library for over 27 years. She was trusted by everyone, local officials, town clerks, volunteers. She had once written a poem for the mayor's dog's funeral. She remembered patrons' birthdays, always had Werther's candies at the front desk, and took pride in keeping the library's budget balanced to the penny. So when the state auditor's office flagged a discrepancy during a routine grant compliance review in 2019, no one expected where it would lead. A ledger out of line. It started with a missed documentation file. The library had applied for a small state grant, just $12,000 for upgrading its computer lab, but when the auditor asked for the receipts, the library couldn't produce them. Carolyn claimed the folder had been misplaced, possibly shredded during spring cleaning. The auditor, Marta Guzman, didn't push at first. But 2 months later, during a separate grant review involving several libraries in the county, Marta noticed something odd. Elmstead's library showed much higher maintenance expenses than towns of comparable size. New carpeting, twice in 4 years. HVAC replacements, 3 separate entries. Printing services, nearly $8,000 annually for a building with 2 printers. She requested the full financial records from the last 5 years. Carolyn cooperated, cheerfully in fact. "We're just a little old place with old pipes," she said in her usual sing-song tone. "Everything is held together with tape and hope." But when Marta cross-referenced the invoices, some were missing key information: vendor addresses, PO numbers, or tax IDs. And several had the same digital timestamp down to the second. That shouldn't have been possible. Then there was the strangest part: the names of the vendors themselves. Crispin and Dorn Interiors, Leaf Deck Systems, Pine Row Services. None of them had a verified business license in the state of Ohio. Fictional firms and fabricated funds. Marta did something most auditors don't do. She got curious. Using a friend in the state's Department of Taxation, she ran the vendor names through business license databases, sales tax submissions, and federal EIN registries. Nothing. So she checked domain registrations. Each of the vendor names had an associated website, but they were skeletal basic templates with a stock photo or two and vague descriptions of services offered. Premium carpet and flooring solutions, Eco HVAC systems, document output specialists. All the domains had been registered within the same 6-month window in 2015. All used the same registrar, and each had a contact email tied to a Proton Mail address. Still, there was no proof that Carolyn was involved. For all anyone knew, she had simply been defrauded herself by fake companies. So Marta referred the case to the County Inspector General's office, which assigned an investigator named Trevor Langley to quietly look into it. A house too nice for a librarian. Trevor started with public records. Carolyn Meeks made $49,000 per year. Her husband had passed away a decade earlier. She had no known side businesses, no rental properties, no dependents. So why did she own a newly remodeled 3-bedroom home in the upscale end of town? Why was she leasing a Lexus? Why had she recently made a $12,000 cash donation to the Elmstead Historical Society? Trevor got a warrant for her bank records. What he found didn't match her reported income. Multiple transfers came in from small local government accounts, many routed through intermediary credit unions, often marked with vague memos like facility reimbursement or vendor disbursement. Then, on the same day, identical sums would be transferred from Carolyn's personal account to what looked like shell accounts under the vendor names. The loop was painfully simple. Carolyn created fake vendors. She submitted fake invoices for modest services, never large enough to raise alarms. Once the checks were cut by the town treasurer's office, which assumed the library was self-managed, she'd deposit the checks into bank accounts linked to the fictional companies. From there, the money would be funneled into her own savings account. Sometimes the trail doubled back into small charitable donations to make herself look even more benevolent. Nobody asked questions. One of the most chilling realizations was that no one had questioned a thing, not the treasurer's office, not the library board, not the town clerk. Everyone trusted Carolyn implicitly. In interviews, board members were apologetic and shocked. "She bakes us cookies before every quarterly meeting," one said. "We've never had reason to doubt her," said another. "She always provided budgets and told us how careful she was with money." And she was careful, meticulous, in fact. Carolyn would even underreport some grant requests just to maintain a modest financial image. Her goal wasn't flashy wealth, it was quiet comfort. Trevor began to refer to her, half-jokingly, as the embezzler in cardigans. The interview. Carolyn was brought in for a voluntary interview in November 2019. She remained calm, polite, almost grandmotherly. When asked about the vendor names, she paused. "Oh, those must have been left over from the old days, before we centralized our services. I think we used to contract out flooring and stuff." When pressed further, she offered vague recollections. "They were probably small time. I don't recall specifics." Trevor let the silence grow. Finally, he slid a folder across the table. Inside, printouts of the bank transfers, side by side with the invoices she had submitted. She stared at them for a long moment. Then, without looking up, she said softly, "I suppose this is where I stop pretending, isn't it?" The quiet arrest. Carolyn Meeks was arrested at home the next morning. No cuffs, no fanfare. She surrendered quietly, wearing a pale green sweater and holding a tote bag with her favorite mystery novel inside. She was charged with felony theft in a public office, money laundering, tampering with records, wire fraud. In her statement to investigators, Carolyn claimed she never intended to hurt the library. "I kept it small, just a little extra here and there. I gave back, too. The children's reading corner, that was paid for with my own money. I just wanted not to worry anymore." She had started siphoning small amounts after her husband died. At first, it was to cover the mortgage. Then, to replace a broken water heater. Later, to afford retirement she feared would never come. The community reacts. The town of Elmstead was devastated. Not because Carolyn had stolen, but because of how easily she had done it. The betrayal didn't come with violence or venom. It came with cookies, soft smiles, and perfectly balanced budgets. The library board resigned. The mayor issued a public apology. Audits were expanded across other departments. The library itself remained open, but donations plummeted. Volunteers disappeared. Patrons stopped showing up. It would take years to rebuild the trust. But one question lingered in every board meeting, every community forum, and every whispered conversation at the diner counter. If the state auditor hadn't caught a missing $12,000 folder, would anyone have ever noticed? In the quiet aftermath of Carolyn Meeks's arrest, the town of Elmstead found itself grappling with more than a legal case. It was reckoning with the uncomfortable truth that trust, once broken, leaves behind not silence but suspicion. What else had they missed? Cracks beneath the card catalog. After the news broke, the Ohio Attorney General's office launched a formal audit into the Elmstead Public Library's financials spanning the last 10 years. They assigned forensic accountant Desiree Polk, known for her work uncovering fraud in municipal departments, to comb through every transaction, purchase order, and reimbursement submitted during Carolyn's tenure. Desiree approached the case like an archaeologist, digging through digital archives and dusty filing cabinets alike. What she found astonished even seasoned investigators. The $400,000 figure originally suspected. Low. By her estimate, Carolyn had siphoned closer to $513,000 over 9 years. It wasn't just vendor fraud, it was full-scale financial manipulation, carried out slowly, quietly, and strategically. Hear how she did it. Method 1. The Phantom Vendors. As uncovered in Section 1, Carolyn created multiple fictional vendors. But she didn't simply use them to cover large expenses, she structured them to mimic real transactions. For example, Pine Row Services billed $1,982 for document archival labor, a believable figure for an outside contractor, digitizing old library records. Crispin and Dorn Interiors invoiced for ADA-compliant entry modifications, matching up with a real improvement project from the year prior. Carolyn often inserted these false invoices alongside real ones in the same disbursement batch, ensuring they blended in with legitimate expenses. To further mask the trail, she routed payments through 2 different credit unions. Each vendor account was connected to a post office box rented under an alias using a secondary ID. These accounts would be opened, used for 6 to 12 months, and then closed, leaving behind little more than a whisper. Method 2. Rounding up the receipts. Carolyn also employed a subtler technique, expense rounding. When ordering new books or materials from approved vendors, she would often inflate totals, slightly rounding invoices from, say, $978.23 to an even $1,200. She'd deposit the overage into her controlled accounts and make sure the approved receipts matched the totals shown to the library board. Desiree Polk discovered 87 instances of this practice over the span of 5 years, netting Carolyn nearly $40,000 in micro-thefts no one had flagged. Method 3. Cash donations and self-created campaigns. Perhaps the most bizarre part of Carolyn's scheme was her creation of fictitious donation campaigns. At least 3 times between 2014 and 2018, she announced small fundraisers on behalf of the library's Friends of Literacy initiative, a reading program that had never formally existed. Flyers were posted on the library bulletin board, often advertising matching donations from anonymous benefactors. Patrons would donate $10, $25, even $100 at a time, believing they were supporting children's reading groups or new audiobook acquisitions. Those donations were logged in handwritten notebooks and never deposited into the library's official accounts. In reality, they went straight into a personal PayPal account under the email elmreads86@protonmail.com. To preserve the illusion, Carolyn would occasionally order a box of children's books from a bulk distributor and stack them prominently in the youth section. The secret second life. When agents obtained a search warrant for Carolyn's home computer, they discovered something unexpected: a secret second life, completely virtual, meticulously curated. Under the pseudonym Agatha Hush 23, Carolyn had built a presence on forums and digital marketplaces devoted to luxury thrift reselling. She ran a private eBay storefront with over 1,000 transactions. Items listed included rare vintage handbags, limited edition typewriters, first edition books she claimed were estate finds, signed literary memorabilia. Many of the items matched descriptions of things once held in the library's special collections room. That room had been quietly shut down in 2016 for what Carolyn told the board was fire code compliance work. In reality, she had liquidated it. Desiree cross-referenced the photos used on Carolyn's storefront with archived images of the special collections inventory. It matched, almost item for item. Over the course of 5 years, Carolyn had profited an estimated $32,000 from reselling public property. The town reacts again. When these revelations became public during the pre-trial discovery phase, the town's reaction shifted from sympathy to betrayal. She hadn't just taken money, she'd taken pieces of the town's history. A copy of the Federalist Papers, donated in 1973. A letter signed by Langston Hughes, gifted by a visiting poet. a leather-bound journal from the town's founding pharmacist. All gone. The mayor released a second statement, this time far less charitable. We were misled and manipulated. What once appeared to be a lapse in judgment now reveals itself as a pattern of deception. Carolyn's legal defense began to fracture. Her attorney initially sought a plea deal for house arrest and community service, citing her age, she was 63, and spotless criminal record. But as new charges piled up including theft of public property, wire fraud, misappropriation of funds, and racketeering, the county prosecutor withdrew all leniency offers. This would be going to trial. A town in crisis mode. Elmstead City Council scrambled to repair the damage. They authorized a full internal audit of all public departments, installation of a new accounting software with real-time oversight, a citizen financial transparency board. The library remained open but was under interim management. Foot traffic had dropped by 40%. Local parents, once regular patrons, now drove to neighboring towns. Teachers canceled field trips. Local authors pulled planned readings. The building itself, an old brick structure dating back to 1911, felt heavy now, like the walls held shame. Board member Evelyn Carr, who had worked with Carolyn for over a decade, said in a news interview, "She didn't just steal money. She stole the story we believed we were living. We thought we were the kind of town where things like this didn't happen." A breaking point. Just 1 month before the trial was set to begin, another twist emerged. Trevor Langley, still assisting the prosecution, discovered encrypted files on a backup drive recovered from Carolyn's attic. The files, when decrypted, contained internal documents from 3 other small-town libraries in Ohio. Each library had received consulting help from Carolyn in recent years, voluntary aid on grant writing and budgeting workshops. All had reported minor financial discrepancies in the past, but nothing large enough to trigger investigations. Were they copycat victims? Or had Carolyn quietly tested her system across other libraries before perfecting it in Elmstead? The Attorney General's office opened new inquiries into these cases, though no charges had been filed as of that time. But investigators now suspected Carolyn's playbook might not have been used just once. This wasn't an act of impulse, it had become a method. Courtroom quiet. Carolyn Meeks's trial began in early March 2020. Her defense was quiet but strategic. They emphasized her years of public service, her widowhood, her mental health. The prosecution, however, came prepared. They painted a picture of a woman who had leveraged her trust, position, and relationships to create a years-long machine of theft and cover-up. They played the insurance voice memo she had recorded in 2018, originally meant as a journal entry where she described the schemes as her only path to peace. In it, she said, "No one will suspect me. They never do. I'm just the librarian." It took the jury less than 3 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing and aftermath. Carolyn was sentenced to 12 years in state prison with eligibility for parole after 7. She was also ordered to pay $497,000 in restitution, though prosecutors acknowledged the town would likely never see most of it. Her eBay accounts were seized. The digital files of the stolen rare books were cataloged. Some items were recovered from private buyers and returned to Elmstead under a quiet amnesty program. As of 2025, the Elmstead Public Library continues to operate now under a new name, the Carr Public Library, in honor of Evelyn Carr, who helped rebuild trust. The library's motto, once turning pages together, now reads, "Light in every corner." They installed a new rare book room, with cameras, with glass doors, with receipts for everything. But among the residents of Elmstead, one question still lingers, in a softer voice now. How many other Carolines are out there trusted, overlooked, and quietly rewriting the rules beneath fluorescent lights in public trust? Story 3. Blueprints and Lies, the architect who faked his death. It was a warm September morning in Sarasota, Florida, when the body washed ashore. Dressed in khaki slacks and a linen shirt, the man had no identification. The tide had carried him into a narrow inlet behind a row of upscale beachfront homes, wedging him between a jetty and a patch of mangroves. No signs of trauma, no stolen wallet, no nearby car. Authorities didn't know who he was, at least, not at first. But 2 days later, a woman named Rebecca Grayer came forward with a worried tone and red-rimmed eyes. The man, she claimed, was her husband, Vincent Grayer, a 54-year-old architect who had gone missing 3 days earlier after taking his sailboat out alone. An accident, it seemed, a tragic one. He was declared dead within the week. But that was just the beginning. The architect of quiet prestige, Vincent Grayer wasn't a household name, but in architectural circles across the Gulf Coast, he was something of a quiet icon. Known for his elegant designs that fused mid-century minimalism with coastal functionality, Grayer had designed dozens of properties between Tampa and Naples, particularly along barrier islands where old-money clients preferred discreet luxury. His firm, Grayer & Lutz Design Studio, was small, only 8 employees, and catered to a niche clientele who valued exclusivity over grandeur. Vincent was the face of the company, polished, articulate, always seen in loafers and rolled sleeves, never without a moleskin in hand. He lived comfortably, if not extravagantly, with his wife Rebecca in a restored 1950s bungalow, with solar panels and native landscaping. They had no children, no pets, and according to neighbors, kept to themselves in a pleasant way. So when Vincent disappeared during a solo sailing trip, it was deemed an unfortunate accident. His sailboat was found anchored offshore, sails slack, engine off, a life jacket still folded neatly on deck. He was presumed to have fallen overboard and drowned. But there were already problems with the story. The body that didn't fit. The autopsy conducted by the Sarasota County Medical Examiner found water in the lungs indicating drowning, but also noted something strange. The man's molars had gold fillings. Vincent Grayer, according to his dental records, had none. The height and weight matched, as did eye color and hairline, but fingerprints were missing, scrubbed smooth, either through time or intentional damage. Even stranger, no water was found in the lungs' lower lobes, only the upper. That suggested the man may not have drowned at sea, but had water poured into his mouth post-mortem. A quiet email chain between the medical examiner's office and the sheriff's department was started. But by then, Vincent had already been cremated. Rebecca insisted he had wanted no fuss. Insurance, inheritance, and anomalies. Within 2 weeks of the death certificate being issued, Rebecca filed for a $2.8 million life insurance payout, ownership transfer of all business assets, the liquidation of a jointly held offshore account registered in Belize. That last item raised a red flag with investigator Leo Harmon of the Florida Department of Financial Services. Belize wasn't inherently suspicious. Plenty of Americans held legitimate offshore investments there, but Vincent Grayer had never disclosed such an account in any financial filings related to his business or estate. Leo opened a soft inquiry. The offshore account had been created under VG Development Holdings, using an address in Panama City, Panama. The email associated with the account was Gray, Stone, project@protonmail.com. A stylized pseudonym. The account had last been accessed not by Rebecca, but by a remote login from a server in Buenos Aires, Argentina. This was 3 days after Vincent Grayer had been declared dead. The missing architect. Leo reached out to Sarasota PD to request access to the initial death scene report. He was surprised to find it only partially completed. Why? Because the responding officer, Rookie Patrolman Tyler Chen, had noted inconsistencies on the day the body was found. In his notes, no signs of trauma, no boat debris, sandals on shore but no matching tread around the water line, mangrove roots undisturbed, as if the body was placed, not drifted. But the report was quietly signed off and closed within 48 hours due to lack of foul play indicators. Leo dug deeper. He contacted Grayer and Lutz Design Studio, posing as a state investigator conducting a routine insurance audit. When he asked to speak with the current managing partner, the receptionist replied, "Oh, Mr. Grayer's been sending emails again, but he's not taking calls directly." Leo froze. "Mr. Grayer, Vincent." "Yes," she said, "from his satellite office. We've just been told he's traveling under doctor's orders for stress." The receptionist had no idea Vincent was supposed to be dead. Piecing together a ghost. Over the next 2 weeks, Leo began building a map. Vincent Grayer had allegedly died on September 9th, but emails from his address vincent@grayerlutz.com continued for over 3 weeks after. They were short, direct, and devoid of his usual tone. Things like, "Approve the southern facade change. Send invoice batch to Maria. Begin permitting for 242 Lido Key." The digital fingerprints were cautious, no attachments, no metadata revealing time zones. But one slip gave Leo a breakthrough. An image attached to a zoning blueprint had been automatically resized by a cloud service, LATAMG drive compression. That was a South American server cluster based in Chile. Leo reached out to Interpol. A week later, he got a match. A man using the alias Michael Storn had checked into a parking space in Valparaiso, Chile, using a U.S. passport with Vincent Grayer's birth date and a digitally altered photo. The man had paid cash. He logged into a computer under a guest account, accessed email, and used encrypted chat services. Then vanished again. A marriage built on secrets. Investigators turned their attention to Rebecca. She had grieved publicly. She had held a modest memorial. She had even donated $20,000 to a local design scholarship in Vincent's honor. But phone records painted a different picture. In the weeks before Vincent's disappearance, she had been in near-daily contact with a man named Caleb Brantley, a former contractor who had worked on one of Vincent's residential projects 2 years earlier. Brantley had no fixed address and a history of petty fraud charges, though nothing major. He worked odd jobs across the state. Rebecca's text to Caleb revealed a mix of coded language and emotional appeals. "We're almost free. You promised me this wouldn't hurt anyone. Just keep the body cold, that's all I ask." Investigators subpoenaed her financials. She had wired $9,400 to a small funeral home in Ocala, Florida the same week the mystery body appeared on the beach. The funeral home owner, when questioned, admitted that a man with a burn on his neck had paid cash to store an unclaimed body for 2 days. No questions asked. The description matched Caleb Brantley. But whose body was it? DNA pulled from the cremated remains preserved through bone fragments was tested against a distant Grayer relative. No match. The body was Vincent. Interpol confirmed that Vincent, using a forged identity, had applied for property permits in Punta del Este, Uruguay. He was building a home. Blueprints retrieved from the registry, almost identical in style to his Florida homes. He hadn't disappeared, he'd relocated. And the person found dead on the beach, still unidentified. End of the section. By the time authorities had built a full timeline, Vincent Grayer was long gone. No known arrest had been made. No extradition requested. Rebecca was arrested and charged with fraud, obstruction of justice, and abuse of a corpse. Caleb Brantley disappeared. He has not been found to this day. And Vincent. He became the architect of his own second life, leaving behind blueprints, lies, and a town stunned by the quiet man they thought they knew. But one question remains, pressing and haunting. Who was the man in the sand? And did he volunteer or was he chosen? The revelation that the body cremated as Vincent Greer was not, in fact, Vincent Greer, upended what had appeared to be a tragic accident. But what had once been a closed case was now a tangled web, a suspected murder, an international fugitive, a complicit spouse, and a missing accomplice. And at the center of it all was a man who had designed his escape the same way he designed homes: clean lines, hidden support beams, and no obvious exits. But as investigators dug deeper, they learned that Vincent Greer's life had long been built on fault lines. The man in the sand. With the DNA mismatch confirmed, the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office reopened the case as a possible homicide with body misidentification. The question, who was the man they had cremated? Unfortunately, cremation had destroyed many forensic options, but bone fragments taken at autopsy and stored as part of the original investigation were still available. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement sent the samples to a private genetics lab in North Carolina specializing in genealogical tracing. Within 3 weeks, they had a familial match. The victim was Mark T. Neely, a 47-year-old drifter originally from Alabama with a history of homelessness and substance use. His last known location, a county shelter in Ocala less than 15 miles from the funeral home, where a man with a neck burn had reportedly stored a body days before the discovery on the beach. Fingerprints had been removed and facial features were water-softened, but cause of death could now be re-examined. An independent forensic pathologist, working from photos, noted discoloration and bloating inconsistent with ocean submersion. Instead, signs pointed to positional asphyxiation likely caused by restraints. Mark Neely hadn't drowned. He had been killed elsewhere and planted to look like Vincent. Caleb Brantley's trail. The discovery cast a spotlight on the man who had now vanished, Caleb Brantley. Investigators learned that Brantley had previously worked at a crematorium in Georgia, where he was quietly let go after suspicions of improper record-keeping. Though no charges were filed, the funeral home was fined for missing logs. He had since moved across Florida under a series of aliases, sometimes doing odd construction work, other times bartending. Rebecca Greer, it turns out, had stayed in contact with him for years well before Vincent's disappearance. Text messages recovered from Rebecca's phone suggested a more than professional relationship. "Don't let him scare you. He always wanted control. After this, we leave everything behind. I don't care if he watches from the other side of the world, he's dead to me now." But whether Caleb was acting with Vincent, against Vincent, or for his own purposes remained murky. Interpol red notices were issued, but there were no confirmed sightings. The trail had gone cold somewhere near Bogota, Colombia. The false life, the real debt. While Vincent Greer had successfully faked his death, what he couldn't fake were the financial ghosts he left behind. Investigators uncovered a network of shell companies registered through tax havens Belize, Seychelles, Gibraltar. Some were directly tied to VG Development Holdings. Others bore names connected to design firms that had never existed in the U.S. Through subpoenaed bank records and international assistance, it was revealed. Vincent had been slowly moving money millions over several years into these shell entities. The money didn't just come from his architecture firm. Some of it was from client overbilling, phony permits, and ghost design fees. He had fraudulently billed clients for projects that had already been paid for, then sent the invoices again under different company names. In total, $6.2 million in fraudulent earnings were traced to accounts under his control. This wasn't just a personal escape plan. It was long-term financial fraud, potentially qualifying as a RICO-level offense. Rebecca's turning point. Faced with overwhelming evidence and under pressure from federal prosecutors, Rebecca Grayer flipped. Her cooperation agreement included a reduced sentence recommendation in exchange for full transparency. In deposition, Rebecca admitted she had learned of Vincent's offshore accounts 2 years before his disappearance. Their marriage had deteriorated after she discovered infidelities. Vincent had relationships with at least 2 former clients. Vincent proposed the fake death scheme after being tipped off that a federal audit might target his firm. He promised her $1 million if she played grieving widow and secured the life insurance. Mark Neely, the man found dead, had been recruited by Caleb under the promise of quick cash and no questions. She claimed she believed Neely would be drugged and planted, not killed. When asked by prosecutors if she had physically witnessed Neely's death, she shook her head. Caleb handled everything. Vincent never touched the body. That was the whole point. She gave investigators the access password to an encrypted folder on Vincent's old laptop. Inside, a video recording of Vincent, filmed on his sailboat, dated 3 days before his disappearance. The architect speaks. In the video, Vincent sits in the cabin of the boat, a glass of white wine beside him. He stares directly at the camera. By the time this is seen, I'll be ashore on another continent. I'm not proud of what I've done, but it's necessary. The world doesn't reward the ethical, it rewards the invisible. He goes on to say, they'll find a body, it won't be mine. Rebecca will play her part, and if she doesn't, she'll lose everything. The firm is collapsing, the debts are coming, the lawsuits. This was the only way to survive. He smiles bitterly. Design isn't just about buildings. It's about escape routes. The video was time-stamped, validated, admitted into evidence. It became the linchpin in confirming Vincent's fake death as premeditated fraud. A home overseas. 2 months later, a property raid in Punta del Este, Uruguay, yielded blueprints, design files, and furniture orders, all in Vincent's style. But Vincent was already gone. A neighbor described him as an American who spoke good Spanish and tipped well. He vanished again, leaving only digital footprints. Interpol continues to issue periodic updates, possible sightings in Cape Verde, Morocco, and the Canary Islands. None confirmed. The working theory. Vincent moves under the radar using forged identities, short-term rentals, and contacts cultivated during his architecture days. A man who designed not just houses, but his own disappearance. The community's reckoning. Back in Sarasota, former clients of Grayer and Lutz Design Studio filed a class action lawsuit, alleging fraud, overbilling, and design theft. The firm was dissolved. Vincent's former employees, most unaware of the scheme, lost their jobs and reputations. Rebecca, sentenced to 6 years in prison, is currently housed at a federal facility in Tallahassee. Her cooperation helped recover $1.2 million in insurance payouts. The rest remains offshore. In a statement during her sentencing, she said, "I thought I was escaping a marriage. I didn't realize I was becoming a fugitive's alibi." A new crime trend. Vincent's case, while rare, is not unique. Since 2010, there has been a noted rise in low-drama disappearances, cases in which financially pressured professionals stage accidental deaths to avoid mounting liabilities. Investigators call them clean vanishings. In nearly every case, the victim is someone seemingly respectable with no criminal record. The planning is meticulous. The aim is not violence but reinvention. Vincent Greer has become a textbook case. His face remains on Interpol's red notice list, but law enforcement believes he may have undergone facial surgery and possibly even vocal cord modulation to further avoid capture. A man who disappeared in plain sight and took someone else's life to make it believable. But what does it say about the world we live in? When the quiet man designing luxury homes could just as easily design a murder. By the time authorities truly understood the scale of Vincent Greer's deception, he had been gone for nearly 9 months. There was no final arrest, no mugshot, no dramatic extradition or courtroom confession, only a sequence of broken connections, empty homes, and luxury architecture scattered like breadcrumbs across continents. He had written his escape plan with the same precision as a floorplan, layered, elegant, and almost undetectable. But even the cleanest designs leave behind unfinished edges. The last known movement. Interpol's last verified sighting came in late May 2021. An immigration officer in the Azores, Portugal's remote island chain, reported that a man matching Vincent Greer's appearance had entered under the name Renzo Martin, an Argentinian national with a valid passport. The man cleared customs easily. No alerts flagged. He spoke fluent Spanish, wore wire-rimmed glasses, and claimed he was visiting to scout properties for a boutique hotel project. He booked a 5-night stay at a local eco-resort, paid in cryptocurrency, and checked out on schedule. Security footage showed him boarding a ferry to São Jorge Island. After that, nothing. The trail went cold again. But this wasn't just about where Vincent had gone. This was about what he had left behind. A blueprint of ruin. Back in Florida, the aftermath of his disappearance continued to unfold in painful detail. Greer and Lutz Design Studio, once a boutique favorite for the coastal elite, was now synonymous with betrayal. Its 8 employees who had known Vincent as a thoughtful mentor were suddenly jobless, their portfolios tainted. Former co-owner Marla Lutz, who had no involvement in the fraud, took the brunt of public backlash. She gave a single televised interview, visibly shaken. He forged invoices, doctored tax filings, and backdated permits. He made it all look real. I signed things I thought were standard. I trusted him. Dozens of clients came forward with claims. Some had been double-billed for design work. Others had paid inflated construction costs for projects that never materialized. In total, civil suits filed against the firm exceeded $12.4 million. Insurance companies balked. Reimbursements were delayed or denied entirely. Several of Vincent's high-profile homes, known for their sleek coastal aesthetics, were seized and auctioned off to recover funds. One of them, a sprawling minimalist compound in Naples, fetched less than half its value. It was already falling into disrepair. The psychology of the disappeared. Experts from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit began profiling Vincent shortly after the case became international. They compared his methods to those of high-functioning white-collar offenders with narcissistic tendencies, quiet, nonviolent, but deeply manipulative. Special Agent Helena Cross put it succinctly. Vincent didn't disappear to avoid justice. He disappeared to control the narrative. Death was his greatest disguise, and he used it. What made his case unusual was the patience. Unlike most fraudsters who implode under pressure or flee impulsively, Vincent had planned his escape for years. He had tested aliases, planted shell companies, and slowly decoupled his personal identity from official records. He built a second life, blueprinted it, even. Everything was deliberate. Even the body he used to fake his own death. The victim no one saw. Mark T. Neely's death was ruled a homicide. Though lacking a suspect in custody, prosecutors charged Caleb Brantley in absentia for his role in the killing. An international warrant remains active. Mark had no next of kin, No obituary, no public mourning. Just a few lines in the back of the Sarasota Herald noting that the body, initially identified as Vincent Greer, has now been determined to be another man. In later interviews, Rebecca Greer would tearfully admit, "I didn't know his name, I didn't even ask. Caleb said he was a nobody, just someone who wouldn't be missed." It was perhaps the most haunting aspect of the case. A man erased not just from life, but from memory. All to give another man a second chance. Rebecca's sentence and statement. In 2022, Rebecca Greer began her 6-year sentence at a minimum security federal prison. She had become something of a cautionary tale in white-collar crime, circles a woman who went from real estate dinners to inmate work shifts in less than a year. Her cooperation had saved her from a harsher sentence, but not from public judgment. In a handwritten statement to the court, she wrote, "I didn't kill anyone, but I stood by while someone did. I told myself it was temporary, that Vincent would come back, that we'd disappear together and start over. But it was all a lie. He never planned to include me. He wanted a clean slate and I was part of the dirt he was washing away." She also claimed that, in their final in-person conversation, Vincent told her, "You were the alibi, you were the credibility, and now you're the closure." Loose ends and quiet ripples. Interpol's fugitive division still lists Vincent Greer as at large. He is believed to be traveling under forged South American credentials, possibly working as a private consultant in underregulated territories. Several architects in Chile and Uruguay have reported an older American expat working on high-end private villas, always under different names, always paid in cash or crypto. But nothing confirmed. Meanwhile, the architectural world quietly distanced itself. Journals that once celebrated his work removed articles. Awards he received in the 2010s were rescinded. His projects once photographed for magazines are now footnotes in litigation filings. The Greer aesthetic, a blend of coastal minimalism and brutalist undertones, remains popular. But his name is now spoken only in legal briefs. The final twist, a new signature. In 2023, a high-end resort in Cartagena, Colombia opened to great fanfare. It was celebrated for its striking design, linear courtyards, passive cooling structures, and a discreet luxury that catered to ultra-wealthy travelers seeking privacy. The lead architect was listed as Victor G. Morrow. An architecture journalist, familiar with Vincent's work, noted in a piece, "It's uncanny, the material choices, the subtle symmetry, even the typography on the signage, it screams Vincent Greer." Interpol tried to investigate, but the resort was privately owned, and Victor Morrow had already left the country. His office, rented under a short-term business license that expired before authorities could serve a warrant. No photos, no verified documents, just a clean, modern building and a name that vanished like a line on vellum. Legacy in dust. Vincent Greer remains one of the most sophisticated self-disappearance cases in modern U.S. history. He left behind a collapsed company, a dead man used as a decoy, a wife in prison, a network of defrauded clients, and a mythos that still captivates criminal analysts and architects alike. But unlike many white-collar criminals, Vincent never craved fame. He didn't want to be infamous. He wanted to not exist and to live comfortably in that silence. No Instagram account, no traceable assets, no relatives, just distant buildings, anonymous bank codes, and an ego built into the walls. And yet, as with any unfinished blueprint, we are left with the void between the lines. How many others like him are already gone dead to the world, alive somewhere else, living among us in plain sight? Story 4, Echoes in the Mine, a disappearance beneath the earth. The town of Harper's Ridge, Pennsylvania, sits nestled among the Appalachian foothills, its main street framed by stone buildings and fatting American flags. Like many towns in coal country, Harper's Ridge was built on labor, soot, and sacrifice, its history carved deep underground. But one winter morning in 2002, that history caught up with it. A maintenance foreman named Ernest "Ernie" Kopech failed to show up for his shift at Ridgeview Mine 7. He had clocked in at 6:04 a.m. according to the ledger, and his truck was found parked exactly where he always left it, in spot 17, facing east. His thermos was still warm, but Ernie himself was gone. What began as a missing person report soon became one of the strangest industrial disappearances in modern mining history. Because Ridgeview Mine 7 had been closed for 12 years. No one was supposed to be underground. And yet, Ernie's safety badge had registered a gate override at shaft entrance B3. The logs showed access granted 6:12 a.m. A man of routine, Ernie Kopech was 58, a third-generation miner, the kind of man who still brought a newspaper to work and whistled Sinatra on the way to the locker room. He wasn't reckless, he wasn't prone to disappearing. Ernie worked for the Harper County Surface Maintenance Division, responsible for inspecting old mining infrastructure, sealed shafts, abandoned equipment yards, and flood mitigation sites. It was lonely work, but he liked it that way. He knew every tunnel and switchback from memory. His route on the morning of December 17th was supposed to include checking a ventilation structure adjacent to the shuttered Ridgeview complex, not entering it. That mine number 7 had been sealed since 1990 after a series of methane leaks made it too dangerous for re-entry. It had a troubled history: cave-ins, lawsuits, a fatal gas pocket incident in 1983. Locals referred to it darkly as the Bad Vein. After the closure, the company had capped every entrance with steel and concrete. Warning signs and tamper alarms were installed. No one had been inside in over a decade. But when Ernie vanished, the alarms never triggered. The padlock on shaft B3 wasn't cut, it was missing entirely. The search begins. By 10:00 a.m., Ernie's absence was noticed. A coworker radioed him. No response. By noon, a formal missing person report was filed. Local police, mine rescue personnel, and a pair of old miners retirees who had worked number 7 joined the search. What they found was baffling. Shaft B3 had been unsealed. The heavy metal door, meant to be bolted shut, was ajar. The padlock was missing, but the hasp wasn't broken. It looked opened. Inside, a set of fresh boot prints led down the slope, size 11s, consistent with Ernie's work boots. The print stopped 20 feet in, swallowed by wet rock. The mine's atmosphere levels were stable. No methane, no CO2 spikes. It was safe to enter by the numbers. So they went in. Echoes in the dark. Mine rescue crews, equipped with lights, sensors, and backup air tanks, began a cautious descent into the upper galleries of Ridgeview 7. What they found confused them. Some access tunnels were partially cleared, despite being sealed in the closure. Old safety lines, nylon ropes from the 80s, had been recently retensioned. A trail of pebble-sized LED markers, not standard issue, led deeper into the mine. They followed them, past the old water table, into the third-level drift, a zone never mapped by modern crews. There, in the heart of the abandoned mine, they found something unexpected. A canvas satchel, half buried in silt. Inside, a worn flashlight, a logbook with moisture damage, a small hand-drawn map, and Ernie's ID badge. But no sign of Ernie himself. The map that shouldn't exist. The logbook pages were warped and stained. Most entries were illegible. But the map was readable, hand-drawn in graphite on yellow paper. It depicted a section of the mine not on any official blueprint. A circular chamber, roughly 40 meters wide, labeled Deep Room. connected by a narrow vertical shaft labeled Slide B. Mining engineers from the State Bureau reviewed the document and confirmed no such chamber had ever been documented in Ridgeview 7 or its surrounding veins. That chamber, if real, was part of an unregistered excavation. Illicit mining. This wasn't just a disappearance anymore. It was a criminal investigation. A hidden operation. State investigators combed records. They found rumors going back to the late 80s of off-book coal extractions in Harper's Ridge, whispers of deals between foremen and independent contractors. No permits, no union records. In a 1989 safety hearing, a miner named Kyle Henley had filed a complaint about night crews entering restricted holes. His testimony was dismissed. Months later, he died in a fall at Ridgeview 7. The accident report listed unauthorized wandering as the cause. Was the mine ever truly shut down? Or had someone kept working it in secret? And if so, why? Coal prices in 2002 weren't exactly booming. Ernie's trail goes cold. Despite the trail of LED markers and the discovery of his satchel, no sign of Ernie himself was ever found. Searchers made it as far as a collapsed tunnel beneath the third-level drift. The collapse was fresh, perhaps only hours old. It was sealed with caution tape. Equipment was brought in, drones, ground-penetrating radar, nothing. Just silence, stone, and a growing sense of dread. One rescuer said, "It was like the mine swallowed him, clean, no trace, just gone." The voice recorder. 3 days later, a final clue emerged. A personal handheld recorder, standard issue for inspectors, was found in a drain channel near shaft entrance B3. It had been submerged, damaged. But audio techs recovered part of the final recording. It was garbled, echoey, but the final 15 seconds were clear. Eerie Kopech panting. "Don't know where this comes out. Lights still on, someone was down here recently. I hear something, voices, I think. It's not on the comms, not sure if they're inaudible, thought I saw someone." Silence. Then one final whisper, barely audible. "Why is this here?" Click. End of file. And with that, the case only grew stranger. Mining at its core is about trust in the maps, the measurements, the machines. But what happens when those maps lie? When the tunnels twist away from logic and the ground itself keeps secrets? In the case of Ernie Kopech, trust had failed at every level. And as the investigation dug deeper, both literally and figuratively, the mystery of his disappearance evolved into something far stranger than anyone had anticipated. Because the mine may have been shut down, but something had never stopped working beneath Harper's Ridge. A collapse in a cover-up. Following the discovery of Ernie's ID badge, the underground map, and the unexplained tunnel collapse, state officials made an urgent decision: initiate a controlled excavation of the blocked drift near Level 3 of Ridgeview Mine 7. Over the next 4 weeks, specialized crews removed debris, reinforced supports, and slowly cleared a path toward what they believed to be the deep room noted on Ernie's map. What they uncovered was not part of any geological chart, permit plan, or historical mining document. At the end of the cleared path, they found a circular chamber, approximately 42 meters in diameter, reinforced beams that didn't match state standard mining materials, a central pit, 5 meters wide, descending into darkness, fresh tire tracks small, like those from mining carts, and a locked steel hatch bolted into the floor. This chamber shouldn't have existed, and yet it had clearly been maintained recently. Who built it? Who funded it? And more urgently, why had it been hidden? Industrial archaeology and forgotten contracts. Investigators pulled archived records from Ridgeview Mining Consortium, the original operators of the mine. The company had gone defunct in the early 2000s, but several shipping manifests and engineering notes were found boxed in a state warehouse. One set of documents stood out: a 1986 subcontract with a now-dissolved company called Cardin Geological Solutions. It described experimental core sampling for mineral deviation zones and confidential spatial deviation studies. That term, spatial deviation, was unfamiliar to most mining engineers. But a FOIA request revealed that Cardin had received federal funding during the Cold War for subterranean mapping experiments, designed to test how certain rock formations affected electromagnetic signals. In some instances, it was linked to defense communications blackouts, places where radio waves vanished and compasses spun like tops. And one such site was beneath Harper's Ridge. Cardin's research had focused on non-ferrous anomalies, geological irregularities that could swallow signals, energy, even sound. They had reportedly drilled test shafts into Ridgeview Mine in the late 80s. Publicly, the project was deemed inconclusive. The site was sealed. Privately, it appears someone kept digging. The hatch, the steel hatch at the center of the deep room, was marked with a single symbol: a triangle pointing down. No writing, no locks, just 8 heavy-duty bolts around the rim. With permission from the Pennsylvania Bureau of Mine Safety, the team prepared to open it. On January 21, 2003, over a month after Ernie Kopech's disappearance, the hatch was unsealed. Beneath it, a vertical shaft lined with smooth metal supports descending an estimated 60 feet. No ladder, no safety rails, just a narrow steel cage lift operated by a manual crank above ground. Testing revealed oxygen levels were sufficient, so a small team descended. The room below. At the bottom, the team discovered a subchamber, smaller, square, with unfinished rock walls and a strange metallic hum pulsing through the space. In the center of the room sat a diesel generator, still warm, a battery-powered work light switched off, a folding cot with an old sleeping bag, and a metal cabinet padlocked shut. They also found signs of recent human presence: canned food with expiration dates from the previous year, a box of carbide lamps partially used, footprint size 11 boots matching Ernie's known shoe size. There was still no sign of Ernie himself, but the steel cabinet yielded something chilling. Inside were audio cassettes, over a dozen, labeled with dates ranging from November 2002 to December 16, 2002, the day before Ernie disappeared. Each was marked Field RECORDINGS EK. They were his. The tapes. The contents of the tapes were analyzed and transcribed. Here are excerpts from the final 3 entries. Tape 10, Deck 11, 2002. The humming is getting louder. I can't find where it's coming from. Doesn't sound mechanical, more like it's coming from the rock, not the walls, the air itself. Tape 11, Deck 14, 2002. Found the old elevator shaft. Not on any blueprints I've seen. Went down 2 levels. There's a room square, weird acoustics. Can hear myself breathing like I'm inside a balloon. No echo, everything's too quiet. Tape 12, Deck 16, 2002, final tape. There's something wrong with the ground. It shifts almost. Felt like the hallway moved behind me. Can't explain it. Left a marker, came back, and the rope was coiled the other way. I'm not imagining this. A long pause. Then a final line. If I don't make it back, tell them this place was built to hide something, but I don't think it wants to stay hidden anymore. Click. End of recording. Disputed reality. The idea that a state-licensed mine contained a secret chamber used for Cold War-era research, then maintained covertly by unknown parties into the 2000s, was explosive. But officials moved quickly to discredit the claims. A press release stated that the chamber was part of an undocumented ventilation experiment, and that no criminal activity was discovered. But leaked photos contradicted this. Online forums exploded with speculation. Was the mine used for military experiments? Was it a Cold War listening station? Or worse, was it used for psychological testing on unwitting workers? Local news ran a brief segment. National media never picked it up. The story quietly disappeared. Much like Ernie, theories abound. Over time, three prevailing theories emerged. One, Ernie got lost and perished in an unmapped section. Believable, except for the fact that no body was ever found, and his last recording implied something was following or disorienting him intentionally. 2. Ernie discovered an illegal operation, possibly resource extraction or black site testing, and was removed. Supported by the chamber's maintenance, recent supplies, and lack of official records. 3. The mine itself is anomalous geologically or otherwise. Strange sound phenomena, missing time, spatial confusion, classic signs of underground liminal spaces. Dismissed by officials, but quietly discussed by geologists aware of Cardin Geological's old research. One last entry. In April 2003, 4 months after the investigation went cold, a new mine inspector assigned to another facility 30 miles away found something odd in his locker. A cassette tape, no label. It was Ernie's voice, but not a journal entry. It was a message. If you're hearing this, it means I found a way out, but it's not where I started. It's not when I started. Something's wrong down there. Time doesn't run the same. Don't go back. Don't look for me. Whatever I saw, it saw me too. Click. No explanation for how the tape ended up there. No fingerprints. No evidence Ernie ever left Ridgeview 7. Just his voice, echoing from somewhere it shouldn't have reached. And so the town of Harper's Ridge, already built on layers of buried history, gained one more hidden story, a whisper beneath the ground that refuses to die. But the question still lingers, unanswered and echoing in the dark. If Ernie Kopec never left the mine, who sent the tape? Mines are not built for the living. They're carved from earth in defiance of nature, dark, airless, crushing environments that require trust in wood, steel, and luck. But Ridgeview Mine 7 was never a place of luck. It was a place of erasure. And by the time investigators finally gave up hope of recovering Ernest Kopec's body, it was clear. They hadn't lost a man. They opened something they were never supposed to. Officially sealed. In late April 2003, just days after the anonymous cassette surfaced in a separate mine inspector's locker, the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, DEP, abruptly ordered Ridgeview 7 permanently sealed. The official reason: instability concerns following exploratory excavation. Within 72 hours, all shaft entrances were welded and filled with concrete. Warning signs were upgraded to federal, no entry, hazardous site classification. The deep room, including the hatch and subchamber, was backfilled with industrial slurry. A 24-hour security presence was temporarily assigned. The site was placed under surveillance by a private contractor name undisclosed in records. State press offices released a brief statement. No human remains were recovered. The site is now deemed irreparably unsafe. Closure is permanent. And with that, the trail was buried literally. But questions persisted. The consultant who was. Weeks before the shutdown, a man had arrived at the site, claiming to be a consultant from GeoCore Solutions, a company subcontracted by the state for geological hazard assessment. He wore standard PPE, carried a DEP-issued badge, asked technical questions about subchamber pressure stability and electromagnetic interference. But there was one problem: GeoCore Solutions didn't exist. A Freedom of Information Act (FOIA) Request filed later in the year turned up no records, contracts, or personnel files tied to the consultant. His badge number traced back to a different state entirely. Surveillance footage showed the man entering the mine with two unidentified individuals, staying underground for nearly 3 hours, then leaving in a vehicle with out-of state plates. The footage was later lost due to hardware failure. The identity of the consultant remains unknown. Locals gave him a name: the man from the third shift. Ernie's legacy. In Harper's Ridge, Ernie Kopech became something of a local legend, a ghost story wrapped in blue-collar realism. Old miners tell stories about him at the bar. He knew those tunnels like the back of his hand. If he got lost, it wasn't an accident. Murals were painted downtown, one showing Ernie standing at the mouth of a tunnel, lamp raised high. Another shows a distorted map of Ridgeview 7 with a red dot labeled Ernie's Turnaround. But his family never got closure. No funeral, no remains, just a safety badge, a satchel, and tapes full of warnings. His brother, Dale Kopech, became an activist pushing for greater transparency in post-closure mine operations. He even published a short book titled Hollow Men: My Brother's Disappearance and the Dark Below. In it, he writes, "They told me mines can't lie, that everything is charted, mapped, known. But my brother vanished in a place they said no longer existed. So either they're lying or something down there rewrote the truth." The geophysical anomaly. In 2005, a study published quietly in a niche geological journal examined geoacoustic irregularities in Appalachian substrata formations. One site mentioned in the study, anonymously referred to as Site 33A, matched Ridgeview's geological profile exactly. The paper concluded that beneath certain abandoned mines, acoustic resonance patterns could create temporary disorientation, cause auditory hallucinations, and potentially induce psychological episodes, particularly in confined underground spaces. But one passage stood out. At Site 33A, spatial drift was observed over a 48-hour sensor deployment. A steel probe placed at coordinates x29173/y10455 was later recovered at x28991/y10387 with no recorded movement. Total deviation, 2.2 meters. No seismic activity recorded. In layman's terms, something moved the equipment without touching it. The authors never published follow-up studies. Their university pulled funding the following year. The department was later dissolved. Tape 13. In 2007, 5 years after the initial incident, Dale Kopech received an unmarked envelope in the mail. No return address, no note. Inside, a cassette tape labeled only 13. It was Ernie's voice. Slower this time, hoarse, unsteady. Here's part of the transcription. "They took the air first, couldn't breathe right. Then the walls changed, like walking in a loop that got smaller every turn. I think I was in there for weeks, maybe years, but the clock still says the same day." A pause. "Heard someone calling, sounded like my dad. He's been dead since '79. Another pause. "If you get this, don't come for me, don't send anyone. The mine isn't closed, it's waiting." The rest of the tape is static. Audio engineers confirmed the voice was consistent with Ernie's prior recordings. No one ever admitted to sending it. Current status. As of 2025, Ridgeview Mine 7 remains sealed. The land was quietly sold to a heritage reclamation group with no public-facing board. No new development has occurred. But in 2021, hikers on a nearby ridge reported seeing a soft red light flickering from a rock outcrop above where Shaft B3 once stood. Forest rangers dismissed it as animal eyeshine or camping lanterns. But no campsites were registered that night. What we know. Ernie Kopek entered a sealed mine. He discovered a chamber not found on any official map. He left behind tapes describing disorientation, unexplained architecture, and sounds with no source. A hidden sublevel, complete with supplies and active equipment, was discovered. Unmarked personnel accessed the site and removed unknown materials. A second cassette was received years later, its source never traced. Everything else is speculation. But the facts leave behind a haunting question, one deeper than coal veins or steel shafts. Did Ernie Kopek fall into an accident? Or did he step into something that was never meant to be mapped? Story 5. The Curious Case of the Cough Syrup Syndicate. In the spring of 2011, pharmacists in 3 Midwestern towns began noticing something strange. Shelves of over-the-counter cough syrup, specifically those containing codeine, were selling out faster than they could be restocked. But this wasn't during cold and flu season. There was no spike in allergies, no regional outbreak. The purchases were neat, methodical: 3 bottles here, 2 there, different buyers, different stores, never suspicious enough to trigger a report. At first they thought it was coincidence, or maybe a new health fad. It was. Within 4 months, more than $2 million worth of codeine-based syrup had disappeared from small-town pharmacies across Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. And no one had seen it coming, because the operation was legal on paper. But behind the paper trail was a quiet criminal syndicate, so subtle, so seemingly polite, that it took a federal task force nearly 2 years to even realize it existed. They called it the Cough Syrup Syndicate, a small-town spark. The first person to raise the alarm wasn't law enforcement. It was Bethany Wilcox, a 47-year-old head pharmacist at a regional grocery chain in Dayton, Ohio. Bethany had worked in the same pharmacy for 15 years. She knew her customers by name, often remembered birthdays, and had an uncanny knack for spotting forged scripts. In March 2011, she noticed a middle-aged man she didn't recognize buying 2 bottles of Max Relief Cold and Flu with codeine. Nothing unusual, except he returned the next day. Then again 2 days later, wearing a different jacket. Bethany checked the security camera footage. Same man, same walk, same bottle, no prescription required. The next week, a different man came in, young, polite, wearing a suit, asked for the same product. Then she saw him in the parking lot later that day, handing the bottle to the first man. That's when she called corporate security. Her report went nowhere. She called the Ohio Board of Pharmacy. Still nothing. So she started logging it herself. Over the next 90 days, Bethany recorded 22 separate purchases of codeine-based syrup at her location alone, all from people who paid in cash, never made eye contact, and asked for no other items. Patterns in the purple. Bethany wasn't the only one seeing it. In Peoria, Illinois, pharmacist Daniel Afalian noticed an uptick in product returns, customers buying multiple bottles of over-the-counter syrup, then claiming they'd grabbed the wrong kind and asking for cash refunds. Some bottles came back sealed, others didn't. Then he noticed that the labels on a few returned bottles looked off. The barcode font was slightly different. The tamper-evident seal glue didn't match the manufacturer's standard. He sent a sample to the manufacturer. They confirmed the worst: counterfeit packaging. The bottle looked like Max Relief, but the codeine content was double the legal limit. Someone was rebottling legitimate product and recirculating it. Enter the DEA. It wasn't until 2 overdose deaths, both linked to codeine syrup, with forged batch numbers, that the DEA took notice. One case in Lima, Ohio, another in Gary, Indiana. Both victims were under 21. Both had trace amounts of promethazine and fentanyl analogs mixed into what should have been standard cold medicine. That triggered the launch of Operation Violet Veil, a quiet, multi-agency investigation involving the DEA, FDA's Office of Criminal Investigations, and local task forces. The objective: find the source of the counterfeit syrup and figure out where the real product was going. A supply chain with holes. Federal investigators began auditing pharmacy chains, independent stores, and wholesalers. What they found was stunning. Between January and June 2011, over 210,000 units of codeine-based syrup were sold through licensed pharmaceutical distributors in just 3 states. That was nearly triple the average for the previous 5 years. There was no corresponding increase in illness, no advertising campaigns, no new products. And yet, order requests had flooded in, particularly from small, rural pharmacies in quiet towns. How? The answer lay in a loophole: pharmacist-controlled overrides. At the time, pharmacists could manually request additional Schedule V medications, including low-dose codeine products, under their own credentials, provided they followed dosage thresholds and proper reporting procedures. It was intended to expedite delivery during high-demand periods. Instead, it became the perfect cover. The phantom buyers. The next break came from a distribution hub in southern Indiana. A warehouse worker, under pressure from management, revealed that a series of large, recurring orders had been delivered to a cluster of pharmacies in towns with populations under 2,000. But when investigators visited the listed addresses, they found a gas station with no pharmacy, a vacant building with a UPS drop box, a trailer with no signage, and a disconnected phone. These pharmacies didn't exist. Or if they had, they'd been abandoned long ago. Yet their DEA registration numbers were still active, never flagged, never audited. Which meant someone had either purchased old, inactive pharmacy licenses or forged new ones using stolen identities. In either case, they were used to order enormous quantities of codeine syrup that simply disappeared off the books. Tracking the syndicate. Over the next 4 months, a federal task force built a digital web of purchases, IP addresses, shipping records, and invoice trails. All roads led to a single entity: GMC Holdings LLC, a Delaware-registered company with a vague mission statement: Supply Chain Optimization Services. The listed address was a mailbox in Wilmington. The registered agent, a shell name used in over 300 other LLCs. But a payment processing slip mistakenly filed with the wrong document led investigators to a PayPal business account tied to a man named Marvin Clemens, a former pharmacist from Columbus, Ohio, whose license had been revoked in 2004 for improper dispensing. Marvin had disappeared from public view a decade earlier. But he hadn't been idle. He had built an empire. The polite criminal, Marvin Clemens, was never flashy. In fact, when agents finally raided his suburban warehouse facility outside Springfield, they were shocked to find impeccably clean bottling equipment, custom-built label printers, packaging identical to name brands down to the heat seals, and a manual, a printed guide titled Purple Logic, Standard Operating Procedures for Repackaging and Redistribution. Clemens had written it himself. It was detailed, coded, and filled with aphorisms like, always rotate delivery personnel, never push more than 3 bottles per buyer per location, cash is clean, crypto is invisible, customers aren't addicts, they're recurring revenue. In total, investigators seized 14,000 bottles of counterfeit syrup, $1.8 million in cash, dozens of shipping logs referencing small towns, most of which had no pharmacies. The scale was jaw-dropping. But Marvin Clemens was never arrested. He wasn't there. He hadn't been to the warehouse in weeks. Cameras showed him leaving one night, locking the door and driving away. The car was later found at a rental return in Dayton. He had vanished. And so the syrup stopped moving, the shelves restocked, the overdoses tapered off. But one question remained. How did one man convince hundreds of people to keep buying, bottling, and distributing without anyone ever noticing? In most criminal enterprises, hierarchy is visible. There are bosses, middlemen, and street-level operators. But the cough syrup syndicate operated like vapor, present everywhere, hard to contain, impossible to grasp. Its founder, Marvin Clemens, had built a model of frictionless crime where every cog in the machine thought they were working alone, for a side hustle, or worse, doing something entirely legal. It was only when federal agents started unwinding the threads that the full scope became clear. This wasn't just about counterfeit medicine. It was about the reinvention of white-collar drug trafficking. And it all hinged on one thing: the label game, the genius of legitimacy. For years, Clemens had quietly acquired expired pharmacy licenses through auction sites, estate sales, and even obituaries. In several cases, he purchased the operating rights to former independent drugstores in rural towns for as little as $2,000. These weren't fake. They were real licenses, just reactivated using minor paperwork and online submissions. Once approved, they allowed him to order Schedule V medications like codeine syrup in non-reportable quantities, open accounts with national and regional pharmaceutical distributors, receive shipments without triggering system-wide red flags. Clemens used dozens of identities, many of them real people, some dead, others unaware, to rotate through ordering systems. Once a fake pharmacy reached a threshold that might draw attention, it was deactivated. Another would open 2 towns over. He called it the rotate and dump strategy. To the distributors, it looked like business as usual. The label loop. The bottling operation was perhaps Clemens' true masterpiece. Using commercial-grade inkjet label printers, the kind used for artisanal food products, his team created perfect replicas of Max Relief, coffees, Syrupex, and other popular cold medicines. But they didn't just copy labels. They manufactured entire fake supply chains. Each bottle had a forged lot number, a fake expiration date, a QR code that linked to a cloned website showing test results, a sticker claiming "now with menthol boost." Some bottles had no codeine at all, just sugar, water, and coloring. Others had lethal combinations of codeine, promethazine, and synthetic opioids. Clemens created tiers of product tailored for different markets. Tier 1 for casual sippers, real codeine diluted. Tier 2, high-octane stronger mix, resealed Max Relief bottles. Tier 3, lethal blends mostly for street resale, often used in purple drank concoctions. And for every tier, a label existed. Some bottles even had loyalty codes, a nod to marketing schemes from real pharmaceutical brands. It was product innovation for addicts. A volunteer army. Clemens didn't need drug mules. He had volunteers, dozens of people across 3 states who believed they were part of a legitimate product testing program. How did he do it? He advertised online under the name VIOCAP Logistics, a fake company offering supply chain temp work and QA field assignments. Applicants were told they'd be reimbursed for buying certain over-the-counter meds, logging the purchase, and mailing them in for evaluation. They were paid $50 per submission. Thousands of bottles poured in. Then the real work began. Clemens and his small crew removed the seals, siphoned out the syrup, repackaged the bottles with manipulated ingredients, and sent them back out using third-party fulfillment centers and stolen FedEx business accounts. Sometimes the re-shipped bottles were sold on street corners. Other times, they ended up in legitimate pharmacies, mixed into the supply chain through returns and resales. At one point, more than 80 Walgreens locations unknowingly carried repackaged syrup created by the syndicate. A ghost in the machine. Despite massive effort, investigators still couldn't locate Marvin Clemens. They found safe houses, lockboxes, computers scrubbed with military-grade erasure tools, even notebooks written in cipher. But no Marvin, until they discovered a dead-drop email account. It was used only once a month, always from a different IP, always for a single message. The last login was traced to a library computer in Muncie, Indiana. There the FBI found a clue, a flash drive left inside the machine's USB port. The drive contained one file, a PDF titled Post-Capitalist Distribution Models, an ethical framework for shadow commerce. It was 47 pages long, written like a manifesto. Excerpt from the PDF. The law sees substance abuse as a failure of character. I see it as a failure of supply. I don't sell addiction, I sell access. The user is not a criminal. The system is the criminal, and I am its corrective lens. MC, Shadow Commerce Notes 2010. Later in the document, every system has a leak. Find the leak, scale the leak, disguise the leak, and when the system patches it, you're already somewhere else. Clemens wasn't just playing the game. He was building a new one. A trail that vanished. By late 2012, the cough syrup syndicate had begun to dissolve. Why? Because Clemens shut it down. He sent an encrypted message to his key associates, few of whom had ever met him in person, telling them to destroy records, cease activity, and dispose of inventory. No one was paid, no one heard from him again. Some say he feared a DEA breakthrough. Others believe he always intended it to be temporary, a prototype, not a legacy. The warehouses were emptied, the equipment sold online. Some of his team turned state's witness to avoid prosecution. But Marvin, he was gone. Where is he now? Over the years, alleged sightings have surfaced. A man matching his description, seen boarding a train in Vancouver. A pharmacy conference attendee in Lisbon, using a fake name. A passport issued in Paraguay to someone named Martin Clayman, with similar facial features. But nothing definitive. Interpol has a red notice filed. The U.S. Marshals Service has him listed in their top 100 cold targets. But privately, some agents believe he's already dead, either by suicide, overdose, or retaliation. Others believe he's just moved on to the next leak. The last shipment. In 2018, 7 years after the syndicate's peak, a small pharmacy in Missouri received a returned bottle of Syrupex cough and cold. It had been purchased online. The buyer claimed it tasted weird. Lab tests confirmed it had no active ingredients, just sugar water, food coloring, and trace DNA. That DNA matched the original sample taken from the Springfield warehouse. It was Marvin Clemens, which means someone somewhere is still bottling, or at least still watching. And so the cough syrup syndicate remains one of the most elegantly designed, legally elusive drug trafficking networks in modern U.S. history, run by a man who saw the loopholes, smiled, and stepped right through. But even now, after all the audits, busts, and reforms, one question lingers unanswered. Was Marvin Clemens just a pharmacist gone rogue? Or was he trying to prove that the supply chain itself is the real drug? If Marvin Clemens was a criminal, he was one of the calmest in history. He never carried a weapon, never made a public threat, never fired a shot or got into a chase. He was, after all, a pharmacist by training, a man of formulas, labels, and spreadsheets. But by the time the Department of Justice closed its case in 2016, Clemens was credited with orchestrating the largest non-narcotic pharmaceutical diversion scheme in modern U.S. history, without ever stepping inside a pharmacy again. He didn't just distribute illegal product. He turned the idea of medicine into currency. And then he vanished, unwinding the empire. Even after the warehouse raid, federal agencies spent years tracing the syndicate's ghostly residue. What they uncovered was staggering. 118 shell companies, each with unique EINs and PO boxes. 42 expired pharmacy licenses, revived just long enough to pass orders. Multiple international reshippers, used to route ingredients and equipment. Over 200,000 falsified product serial numbers, all tied to test lots that didn't exist. But what shook investigators most was the lack of violence. No cartel affiliations, no gang ties, no guns, just a decentralized network of average people working freelance, filling roles, never knowing the full picture. Hear how the pieces fit. Roll what they did, what they thought they were doing. Buyers bought OTC codeine syrups in small batches across multiple states, participating in market research. Packagers relabeled bottles and repackaged them for resale, product testers for cold medicine distributors. Shippers sent finished product to distribution, drop points logistics freelancers handling high-value OTC returns. Some were paid via prepaid debit cards, others via crypto. Many never knew each other. To them, it was gig work. To Clemens, it was an assembly line for untraceable codeine. The trial that never happened. In 2015, the Department of Justice drafted an indictment, 42 counts including conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, wire fraud, identity theft, distribution of adulterated and misbranded drugs, tax evasion. But without a defendant, it sat cold. When asked during a press conference whether they believed Marvin Clemens was alive, Assistant U.S. Attorney Carol Dunning replied, "We believe he is, but if he's alive, he's hiding in a system he understands better than anyone else." And there was good reason to believe that. The airport surveillance. In 2014, Customs and Border Protection flagged a man entering the U.S. from Portugal using the name Simon Kellerman. The passport was valid. The story was believable, independent medical equipment supplier attending a trade show. But a facial recognition hit suggested a 72% match to Marvin Clemens, altered with minor cosmetic surgery and age progression. By the time agents moved in, the man had vanished from the terminal. The passport was found in a trash bin. He had entered but left no trace beyond that. A ghost in the system. Aftershocks. In the years following the shutdown of the syndicate, pharmaceutical policy began to change. The Combat Methamphetamine Epidemic Act, CMEA, was quietly expanded in 2017 to include tracking of certain Schedule V drugs, including codeine-based syrups. A new rule required pharmacists to log every over-the-counter codeine sale, even if under dosage thresholds. Wholesaler audits increased 300%, particularly in rural regions. But the damage had been done. One DEA investigator said in a confidential interview, "Clemens didn't just break the system. He showed everyone where the cracks were. We've been patching ever since." Street use of lean, or purple drink, surged briefly after the syndicate's collapse, likely due to stockpiles, and then leveled off. But new counterfeit syrup brands began to appear, some even using Clemens' old lot numbers. A legacy of deception. The ripple effects on healthcare. Clemens' operation highlighted a rarely discussed flaw in the pharmaceutical supply chain: reverse logistics. Reverse logistics refers to how unused, damaged, or expired medication is returned and destroyed or resold. Clemens exploited this gray area, creating entire batches of returned medicine that were never originally sold, then having them re-enter the market through third-party resellers. A 2019 congressional subcommittee cited the syndicate in hearings on pharmaceutical waste fraud. One congressman called it the most sophisticated counterfeiting operation ever seen in healthcare. But Marvin never made a statement. No confession. No denial. Just silence. The artifact. In 2020, a college student at Purdue University purchased a vintage first aid kit at a flea market near Terre Haute, Indiana. Inside the box, beneath a rusted pair of scissors, was a small bottle labeled Max Relief Cold and Flu with Codeine, Lot A113V. The student posted it online, joking about finding the OG lean. Within hours, the post had thousands of comments. Lot A113V had been part of Marvin Clemens' earliest known batches. Chemists analyzed the contents. It contained precisely 15 mg of codeine per 5 ml, no contaminants, no additives, just pure regulation-strength syrup. Packaged perfectly, stored for years. A professional job. But most chilling was the note found beneath the foam lining of the bottle. They called me criminal. I just filled the gap. MC. It was the last confirmed artifact ever linked to Clemens. The final theory. To this day, many in law enforcement believe Marvin Clemens is alive. Theories about his whereabouts range from living in a remote medical compound in Belize, working under a new identity in the pharma tech sector in Southeast Asia, writing under pseudonyms in academic journals about supply chains and drug policy. Others believe he was never alone, that the syndicate still exists, dormant, waiting. But what makes Clemens unique isn't just that he was never caught. It's that he made people question whether what he did was crime or critique. He didn't traffic heroin. He didn't push fentanyl. He didn't create addiction. He simply manipulated the levers of availability within the rules and let the demand speak for itself. And for a while, the system had no answer. So now, years later, with laws changed and audits strengthened, the final mystery lingers. Was Marvin Clemens a criminal pharmacist? Or was he simply the first to understand that the real drug is distribution? Story 6. The Warehouse of Forgotten Evidence. At the edge of downtown Detroit, beneath a rusting overpass and across from an abandoned bus depot, stood a windowless beige building that most people never noticed. No signage, no windows, just a steel door and an old city sticker that read, "Property of the Detroit Police Department, do not enter." Inside that building was a labyrinth of metal shelves, dust-covered boxes and filing cabinets stacked haphazardly to the ceiling. Some shelves held guns. Others held VHS tapes, envelopes filled with hair samples, half-shredded arrest reports, and entire bins marked only with year ranges. It was called Property Control Room 6, or PCR-6 for short. And by 2009, it had become the forgotten heart of Detroit's criminal past. But no one, not even the officers who worked there, realized that buried beneath the decades of evidence and debris was a file that would expose one of the biggest investigative failures in modern police history. A box, one rape kit, one case, and a cold trail that would thaw with explosive consequences. An accidental discovery. The story began on a humid Thursday in August 2009. Kim Worthy, the Wayne County prosecutor, had been invited to tour one of the city's evidence storage facilities. At the time, her interest was procedural. She'd been receiving complaints about delayed lab testing and backlogged evidence in sexual assault cases. The tour was unremarkable until they reached PCR 6. A clerk casually opened a row of lockers and pointed to several shelves filled with cardboard boxes. Each box had a label. Many were handwritten, faded by time. Worthy asked what was in them. The answer shocked her. "Oh, those old rape kits, most of them from the 80s and 90s. We haven't gotten to them yet." There were hundreds, possibly more. Worthy paused. "How many kits are in this building?" The clerk shrugged. "Thousands, probably." That night, Kim Worthy didn't sleep. The count. Over the next few weeks, a small team of prosecutors, detectives, and interns began manually opening each box in PCR-6. With gloves and face masks, they documented, categorized, and counted every sexual assault evidence kit they found. The final number: 11,341 untested rape kits. Some dated back to 1984. Many were still sealed. Some hadn't even been logged into the evidence system. Others were marked with notes like "no suspect," "victim uncooperative," or worst of all, "case closed." Thousands of survivors had submitted to invasive, hours-long forensic exams. Their kits had been collected, bagged, and tagged. And then shelved. Forgotten. It wasn't just a backlog. It was a systemic failure of justice. One kit, one story. Among the thousands of kits recovered was one dated April 1998. The tag read, "Victim D. Lewis. Location Brush Park. Status Suspect ID'd, no arrest." The box had never been opened. Inside was a rape kit, a torn hospital gown, a swab card, and a Polaroid photo of a woman in her early 20s. Her eyes were swollen from crying. Her hands gripped the edge of the hospital bed. The swabs were sent for testing. DNA hit came back 2 weeks later. Terrence Porter, a repeat offender with prior arrests for sexual assault and armed robbery. He was never charged in the Lewis case. Why? The original detective's notes scribbled on a yellow legal pad explained it. "Victim intoxicated, no witnesses. Will monitor Porter's activities. Case can't proceed." No follow-up, no interview, no subpoena, no test. Porter had since moved to Illinois. His name was tied to 3 other assaults. In one case, the victim died. All after 1998. Kim Worthy's crusade. What began as a moment of outrage turned into a personal crusade for Worthy. She formed the Sexual Assault Kit Task Force, a coalition of state and federal agencies, private labs, victim advocates, and legal scholars. Their mission: test every kit. No matter how old, no matter how damaged. It was a monumental undertaking. Each kit cost $1,000 to test. The city was bankrupt. Labs were overwhelmed. Police unions pushed back, arguing about resources and priorities. But Worthy persisted. Grants were secured, donations came in, volunteers worked pro bono. And slowly, one by one, the stories started to emerge. The chain of neglect. As more kits were tested, patterns formed. Repeat offenders who should have been stopped years earlier. Victims who were never told their cases had been shelved. DNA links to violent crimes in other states. Kits that had been misplaced, mislabeled, or logged under the wrong names. One case involved a serial rapist who had attacked women in both Michigan and Texas. His DNA had been sitting in a box for 15 years. Another linked a convicted child molester to an unsolved assault of a 68-year-old woman. Each box was a time capsule. Each swab, a chance for justice delayed but not denied. Public outrage. When the news broke about the 11,000-plus untested kits, public outrage was swift and fierce. Victims began coming forward. Civil rights groups demanded accountability. Former police chiefs were called to testify. But more than anger, there was a collective realization. This wasn't just a Detroit problem. In Cleveland, a similar audit found 3,000 untested kits. In Memphis, over 12,000. In Los Angeles, more than 6,000. Nationwide, the number was estimated at over 400,000 untested sexual assault kits. PCR-6 had simply pulled back the curtain. The ripple effect. Detroit's discovery led to federal legislation, including the SAFER Act, aimed at improving the processing of rape kits. It also sparked a cultural shift in how law enforcement agencies handled sexual assault evidence. Mandatory tracking systems were implemented. Survivors were given rights to updates about their kits. Grants were distributed to test backlogged kits in every state. And for the first time in decades, thousands of cold cases began to thaw. A place of pain. By 2015, PCR-6 had been fully emptied. Some evidence was destroyed. Other materials were transferred to modern, climate-controlled facilities. But for many who worked there, PCR-6 would never be just a storage room. Retired Sergeant Linda Ortega, who helped catalog the kits, said in an interview, "I walked those aisles for weeks, box after box. Every one of them was someone's worst day, and for years we just left them there." Yet even after the reforms, and even with thousands of cases reopened, one question remained. How many other buildings like PCR-6 exist across America, quiet, dark, and filled with justice left undone? By the time the final rape kit was removed from PCR-6 in late 2015, the building had become something more than a warehouse. To the city, it was a monument to pain. To survivors, it was a haunted archive. And to prosecutors, it was both a failure and a second chance. But what happened next, the painstaking unraveling of each story, proved that PCR-6 didn't just hold evidence. It held lives on pause, frozen in swabs, forms, and forgotten cardboard. The true reckoning was only just beginning. Testing the past. The Sexual Assault Kit Task Force, SAKTF, began with a simple strategy: test the oldest kits first. The logic was grim. If the DNA matched someone still alive and free, they were likely repeat offenders. Statistically, rapists, especially serial ones, don't stop on their own. By 2012, nearly 2,000 kits had been tested. From that, 587 had DNA profiles eligible for CODIS, Combined DNA Index System, input. 127 hits came back with matching profiles. 17 matches were to offenders currently incarcerated for other crimes. 6 matches were to deceased suspects. 104 were linked to individuals with no prior sexual assault convictions. That last number was the most alarming. It meant that rapists had gone undetected, undeterred, and in some cases, celebrated members of their communities for years. Case 7624, a name reclaimed. One such story began in 1993. She was listed in the system as Case 7624. In reality, her name was Michelle Thompson, a 19-year-old college freshman who had been attacked in a campus parking lot after a night shift at a bookstore. She followed protocol, gone to the hospital, completed the rape exam, talked to police. She never heard back. She assumed her case had been closed for lack of evidence. In truth, her kit sat in a metal bin for 16 years. It was tested in 2010. The DNA matched Kenneth Albee, a man with no prior arrests but a history of job transfers across 3 states and accusations that never went anywhere. When confronted by police, Albee denied the rape. But then something chilling happened. Michelle was re-interviewed, now in her 30s, living in Arizona. When asked if she'd ever seen her attacker again, she paused. "Yes, I saw him at a gas station 5 years after. He smiled at me. I told myself it wasn't him." She wasn't believed in 1993. But in 2011, with science on her side, she watched him go to prison. When the victims didn't want justice, not all stories ended in prosecution. For many survivors, receiving a call decades later opened old wounds. Some had moved on, built new lives, changed their names. When the task force offered to reopen their cases, several said, "Please don't, I just want to forget." Others were angry not just at their attackers, but at the system. A woman identified only as RL, whose kit was collected in 1987, said this in a victim impact statement. "You're asking me to testify in 2013 about something you ignored in 1987. I don't owe the state anything. They owed me protection, they owed me dignity, and they failed." Some kits were tested, matched to DNA profiles, and logged but never prosecuted at the request of the victims. To the task force, it wasn't about forcing resolution. It was about restoring choice, something many survivors had been denied for decades. The internal resistance. The project wasn't universally welcomed. Within the Detroit Police Department, several retired officers were furious that the backlog was being made public. One former supervisor told the Detroit Free Press, "We had thousands of cases, not enough officers, not enough money. Something had to give." In court depositions, it became clear that no formal policy ever dictated that rape kits be tested. In some cases, if a suspect had confessed or if detectives believed the case wouldn't result in a conviction, the kit was shelved. Worse, some officers had discarded kits altogether, especially if the victim was homeless, sex worker, intoxicated, or undocumented. These weren't just cases lost in the shuffle. They were cases deemed not worth pursuing. Prosecuting the untested. The SAKTF eventually prioritized a list of 400 high-probability cases, kits with DNA matches, surviving suspects and victims willing to cooperate. From those, more than 200 cases were refiled in Wayne County. One of the most notorious prosecutions was Arthur Millen, a janitor at a charter school with no criminal record. His DNA matched 3 kits spanning from 1994 to 2003. Each time, the attacks occurred near schools or youth centers. Each time, the victims were teenagers. Millen was arrested in 2012. He confessed to 2 incidents and was convicted on all counts. But the real shock came in court. The jury foreman was a survivor. Her own kit had been tested just a year earlier. She told reporters afterward, "I didn't know it was him, but I knew what it felt like. I knew what it meant to be forgotten." The forgotten investigator. One name kept surfacing during internal reviews: Detective Marla Jensen, who had worked dozens of sex crimes between 1989 and 1995. She'd retired early, burned out, disillusioned. When tracked down by a journalist in 2013, she said this, "I filled out the forms, I bagged the evidence, I tagged it and logged it, I thought it would be tested, I really did." She had assumed the kits went to the lab. In reality, many had gone no further than PCR-6. She visited the warehouse after it was emptied, walked the aisles where she once placed evidence, looked at the shelves where names had become numbers. When asked if she felt responsible, she paused. "I feel like we all failed, but I also feel like we can make it right." She later became an advocate for backlog reform, speaking at universities and policy panels. The cultural shift. By 2016, the movement had expanded beyond Detroit. Backlog audits became standard in most major cities. Software was implemented to track every rape kit from collection to resolution. Survivors were legally entitled to updates about their cases in several states. Grants helped eliminate over 60% of the national backlog. Documentaries were released, books were written, and most importantly, trust began to be rebuilt. where the silence ends. On the day the final Detroit kit was logged, prosecutor Kim Worthy gave a press briefing. She stood outside the now-empty PCR-6 warehouse. A camera panned the boarded-up windows. Graffiti scrawled across the side. Her words were brief. These boxes weren't just forgotten. They were ignored. Every time someone said the victim was lying or not worth the effort, another box was added to this place. But now the silence ends here. Still, one unanswered question lingered over everything. If no one had stumbled across those boxes in 2009, would justice have ever come? When the last kit was removed from PCR-6, there was no ribbon cutting, no ceremony, just a rusted key turned in an old lock, and a building finally left to rest. But outside its walls, the echoes of what it once held continued to shape the future of justice. For every story found in those dusty aisles, a truth was uncovered, not just about crime, but about culture, failure, and the fragile thread connecting trust and accountability. PCR-6 was closed, but its impact had only just begun. Changing the law. In 2016, Congress passed the Sexual Assault Survivors Rights Act, a landmark piece of legislation that created federal protections for victims, including the right to be notified before a rape kit is destroyed, the right to access information about their kit's status, the right to preserve evidence without charge for the statute of limitations period. This bill passed with unanimous bipartisan support, a rare moment of unity in Washington. And it began because of what was found in a forgotten Detroit warehouse. States soon followed. By 2020, 37 states had enacted rape kit tracking systems. 29 had implemented mandatory backlog audits. 12 had criminalized the premature destruction of sexual assault evidence. Detroit became a case study in both failure and reform, a roadmap of what not to do and how to recover when trust has been broken. The digital revolution in evidence. What PCR-6 lacked in structure: paper records, mislabeled boxes, decaying files, modern systems sought to correct. Detroit became one of the first cities to implement a barcode-based chain of custody system for every piece of sexual assault evidence. Each item now carries a scannable tag, visible to law enforcement, prosecutors, victims, victim advocates, lab technicians. This shift didn't just speed up investigations, it gave survivors a sense of visibility and control. Where once they waited in silence, now they could log into a secure portal and see exactly where their evidence was and whether it had been tested. As one survivor said, "The difference between now and before. Before I gave them my pain, now I get to follow my hope." The case is still coming. Despite the passage of time, testing and prosecutions continued well beyond the public eye. By 2023, Detroit's task force had tested over 13,000 kits, including new additions post-2009, generated more than 3,200 DNA matches, resulted in over 800 investigations reopened, filed charges in approximately 250 cases, achieved 198 convictions. But perhaps the most astonishing result: more than 80 serial rapists were identified through the backlog, men who had victimized multiple women, often in multiple states, and remained undetected for years, even decades. They weren't hidden behind masks or in alleyways. They were school bus drivers, security guards, pastors, hospital orderlies, and delivery workers. They existed in plain sight, protected not by cunning but by neglect. The victims who returned. Some survivors who had initially declined to pursue prosecution changed their minds. Years after her rape kit had been tested, Angela R., a survivor from 1992, asked to reopen her case. Her assailant had never been charged until her DNA hit linked him to 2 additional assaults. Angela testified in court in 2017. When asked why she came forward after so long, she said, "Because it wasn't just about me anymore. If I stayed silent, he could walk away again." Her testimony helped convict a man who had evaded justice for over 25 years. Stories like hers began to ripple outward, reshaping how survivors viewed time, trauma, and testimony. What happened to PCR-6? After the kits were removed, Property Control Room 6 sat dormant. For a while, it became a symbol. Journalists used it in documentaries. Advocates referenced it in TED Talks. One artist recreated it as a visual installation titled 11,341. In 2021, the city quietly demolished it. On the site now stands a modest memorial park. A single steel plaque bears the inscription, "In memory of the voices that were stored, shelved, and silenced, and to those who refused to let them be forgotten." Locals simply call it the Park of Boxes. The data ghosts. Despite the public victories, the trauma held within PCR-6 extended far beyond Detroit. National investigations uncovered similar backlogs in dozens of cities, each with their own version of a PCR-6. In 2022, the Department of Justice launched the Cold Evidence Initiative, an ongoing digital mapping project to track unresolved rape kit backlogs and link DNA hits across jurisdictions. A surprising result of this effort: a series of data ghosts, DNA profiles that had never been uploaded properly into CODIS, either due to clerical errors or lost paperwork. One such profile matched to 5 assaults across 4 states, stretching from 1989 to 2005. The suspect had died in 2008, never charged. Had even one of those kits been tested on time, 4 victims might have been spared. Legacy of Kim Worthy. By 2024, prosecutor Kim Worthy had become a national figure in criminal justice reform. She received awards, given keynotes, testified before Congress, and launched one of the largest victim advocacy initiatives in the country. But when asked what mattered most, she always returned to the boxes. Every one of those kits was a promise. A promise to fight. A promise to believe. A promise that we had their backs. I will never forget how many times we broke that promise. Reflection: the evidence we keep. In the end, the story of PCR-6 is not about one warehouse or one city. It's about the quiet violence of indifference. The kind that doesn't make headlines. The kind that doesn't leave bruises. The kind that whispers, "This doesn't matter enough." Yet every kit held a person. A daughter, a friend, a stranger whose life divided into before and after. And every box that gathered dust was a statement not of cruelty, but of omission. A silent verdict delivered by bureaucracy. The survivors endured. The stories waited. The system eventually caught up. So the question remains: how many other boxes, figurative and literal, still sit in darkness, waiting for someone to remember that justice can't expire?